Hello everyone, my name is Ryan. I'm currently writing under the pen name Austin Moon, and today I thought I would go through every single book I've ever written. I just finished my latest book in April for Camp NaNoWriMo, and I realized that I've written 8 books in the last 9.5 years, which is almost a book a year, even though I think there's like a 2-year gap in between there somewhere. So that's pretty good. I'm kind of unsure as to what I'm going to call this video, but I'm basically just going to go over each of the projects, each of the 8 projects that I've written, kind of a little bit of what they are, and I think it would be fun maybe if I read like the first line or just maybe a funny line or something like that, just to get a little scope of my writing career so far. So I actually wrote my first novel, and before we get started, I'm considering a novel something that I have finished and is of novel length. So I've started a lot of books, but I haven't actually finished them from start to finish. So that's what I'm considering a novel, even though some of them are a little short or on the shorter side. So yeah, I wrote my first novel in 2014. It was actually for NaNoWriMo. I had discovered NaNoWriMo the day of, so I started NaNoWriMo on November 1st, 2014, and I wrote my first book. And I'm just going to be saying all the titles of these books, even though some of them I might come back to later. I know a lot of people don't like saying their titles, and so they'll say like project whatever, but I'm not really worried about anyone stealing my titles. It's not like any of them are necessarily great titles, so whatever, if you steal my title, I'll hate you forever, but you know, at the end of the day, it's not really that important, because the title doesn't really sell a book, even if it is a really great title. So yeah, basically, the first book I ever wrote is called Where My Heart May Lie. Now, why it's called that, I don't know. I don't really remember where I got that, where I got the name from. I think I named the book after I had written it. And for me, that usually kind of is 50-50. Sometimes I'll have the name immediately as soon as I'm coming up with the idea for the book, and then the other half of the time, it's really hard for me to come up with a name, and usually I'll workshop the name and I'll come up with it after I've written the book. So yeah, the first book I ever wrote, I was 14 for Camp NaNoWriMo, and as Camp NaNoWriMo goes, it was 50,000 words. But since it was the first book I'd ever written, it was really, really bad. There was no structure. I completely pantsed the entire novel, largely because I had just started on November 1st, so I didn't really have any time to plan for that if I wanted to catch up on word count. So I just completely pantsed it, and since it was 2014, it was a YA dystopian story, because every book was a YA dystopian story in 2014, and it was about a girl who lived in like a pocket. It was kind of like City of Ember, I guess. She kind of lived in like a pocket dwelling or universe underneath the earth, and it was her journey to the surface and like finding her family, because of course she was an orphan, as all YA protagonists have to be, and she realizes that she has like distant family, and so she goes to find them. And that's basically the whole story, and then I just kind of made up random conflicts along the way, and the story like didn't really have an ending, but it was 50,000 words, so it was a novel, and it was my first novel, and so I was really proud of it at the time. Of course, I think any 14-year-old would be proud that they wrote 50,000 words, even if it's 50,000 words of crap. So I have it up now, and I'm gonna read the first line, which is nothing special. The first line is, "I've lived in Dotania my whole life, all of my measly 13 years on this planet." That's it. Yeah, like a lot of YA books, I was very angsty. I wrote very angsty characters back then, and I've pretty much only wrote female main characters back then as well. So yeah, that was my first book, and that was 2014, and so moving on to 2015, I'm looking at the list on my phone. The second book I wrote was in September 2015, and it was called Clarity, which don't know why. Another YA dystopian, this one I do want to come back to in the future because I really love this story. It's kind of has a little bit of like a steampunk element. It's very like Treasure Planet-esque in that like steampunk. It's about, well, it's not actually steampunk, but it's in that vein because it's about airships, but it's dystopian because it's in the future and there's like a killer disease and lots of drama and pirates and blah-de-da-de-da. And I wrote that in 2015, and I had imagined that it was longer, and I just went back to check the other day, and the manuscript's actually only 25,000 words, which is extremely short. I thought it was like 30-something thousand. So technically this is really like a novella, not a novel, but I'm still considering it a finished novel because I did plan it out, and I started at the beginning and I ended at the ending where I knew it was going to end. And so I did write an entire story, which you could consider a novella because it's so short, but I'm an underwriter, so really it's not that it's a novella, it's just like underwritten. So yeah, that was the second book I wrote. I could tell that I had improved a lot since the first book, even though there's only like I think less than a year difference between the first and the second. Mostly just because I had actually planned this one and thought about it a lot before I started. I didn't really know a lot about writing conventions and outlines and like the sort of planning you're supposed to do for a story. So I knew there needed to be a beginning and a middle and an end, and I kind of went off of that and just added ideas as I went. And so it was sort of half-pantsed, but I was starting to plan. I was starting to become a plotter. And so that was really important for who I am today. Here is the first line from Clarity, my 2015 novel. The sounds that emerged out of a city like London were the kind that were loud and obnoxious, but somehow comforting, like the city was composing a lullaby. So clearly I was trying to be a little bit more poetic. I was trying to be a little more prosy, which I'm not really known for. I do really love reading books that have beautiful prose, not purple prose, don't get it twisted. I'm trying to improve my prose right now. It's not that they're bad, it's just I really like that style, but that's not necessarily my style. So yeah, that was the first line of Clarity. And so next, my third book, we actually have a jump from 2015. I was in high school. If you don't know, I'm 24, so I was born in 2000, so every year is just the age I was, which is kind of convenient. So I wrote that book in 2015, so I was 15 in high school, and I started a lot of books after that. I probably started like 10 books maybe after that, but I didn't finish another one until 2018, right the summer after I graduated high school, 2018. I wrote a book called Incredibly Wild. I'm sorry, I'm saying a lot. Annoying. I wrote Incredibly Wild. It's kind of a strange story. It's a YA, of course. Everything I wrote back then was YA. And it's a time travel story. So yeah, it's kind of a time travel adventure story. This guy from the future ends up time traveling back to like the 1920s and absconding this girl away, and they have a lot of hijinks and they kind of bounce around. It was like loosely inspired by Doctor Who because I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, so of course that was gonna get ingratiated in a story somewhere, but it had those vibes of like a zany time adventure. So yeah, I wrote that in 2018 and it was 47,000 words, which is still pretty short. If you don't know, industry standard, most books are around 80 to 90k, especially in YA, and especially in these types of genres like sci-fi or dystopian. These are usually longer. Like I think The Hunger Games is around like 100,000 words or 110, something like that. And so yeah, I was really proud of finishing that book because at that time, like I said, there was a huge jump. I hadn't finished a lot of books, but I was starting a lot of books. And so I was really proud of myself at the time for finishing a book, even though I still wasn't doing a lot of editing at the time. Like, if I could go back, that's something that I really wish I could have told my younger self that, like, it's not only that you need to finish things, it's that you need to edit them as well. So yeah, I was writing these books and I was finishing them, but I wasn't really doing anything with them afterwards. I was just kind of going on to the next idea, which I feel like a lot of authors give advice like that. Like, you can just become a writer by reading books and writing more books. Which you can, it just takes a lot longer and you're going to learn a lot slower by just writing new books, because you don't know how to integrate like the ideas and the style and like the great mechanics of a good book. Like, you can read a good book and that doesn't mean you're just going to suddenly be able to emulate that in your own writing just by reading something. So yeah, this was before I started reading like craft books, but at the time I was watching like some like storycraft videos on YouTube and stuff, so I had like a general idea of what needed to happen, but I still wasn't quite in my plotter era yet. This is the first line of Incredibly Wild, which the first chapter is in the female main character's perspective. Orphan girl, that's what they call me. That's a very short first line. Maybe I'll read the next line. They still remember me the way that I was when I first arrived in this little town in upstate New York. Okay. Little telly, but I was trying to like add some character flair there, I guess. Try to add the character's voice. But that was kind of a problem that I had when writing this book, is that it was supposed to be dual POV, but both characters were kind of sounding a lot like each other. I hadn't really learned how to do that, I guess, yet. I was still 18. And so yeah, that was Incredibly Wild. Okay, we got another time jump. It's 2020. So my next book in 2020, it was June 2020. This was right after the pandemic and I had quit my job. So this book was called Always June, and it was a YA contemporary romance, and it hit 68,000 words. So I think this is my longest book to date. It was almost 70K, and it was a dual perspective about a rich kid from New York who his dad dies and the IRS like takes all their money and they have to move to this house in Georgia, and he has to get like a normal person job, and romance and chaos ensues, basically. I think all the next books that I've written are new enough that they're actually on the writing app I use now, which is Ulysses. Previously I used Google Docs because it's free, and Ulysses is not free, but I do really like it. But I do recommend Google Docs if you're just starting out. They have a lot of nice features, and it's saved on the cloud, so you don't have to worry about losing all your precious work. Okay, and the next book is Always June, which I wrote in like 2020, and the first line is, "Yo, August." He turned to see who was calling his name. It was his friend Marks standing over in the kitchen. It just is what it is. I don't really think first lines really matter that much. It's always nice to have a gripping first line, but like, what's the percentage of people who only read the first line and not like the first paragraph or the first page or the first chapter even? So yeah, that was Always June. Okay, the next book I wrote was also in 2020. It was kind of in 2019 too. This book took me a long time to write because I wasn't working on it consistently, because I was working full-time during that period. And so this book was called Beneath the Bone. It was a YA mystery, and I do have plans to rewrite this one, but it's basically a completely different story from where I've started. And so that book is my longest book to date. It was 88K, so almost 90K, which is industry standard, so it's like what I was going for. That book really helped me push myself to write better stories. I did plot a lot of the story, but I still hadn't really read like craft books and stuff at the time, so I was kind of going off of my own knowledge of storytelling and what I had improved upon the last couple years, which did help me, but just not as much as probably I would have liked. So yeah, this story I'll probably rewrite in the future. Don't know when I'll get around to that. I'm kind of focusing on like adult books right now. But yeah. Here is the first line of Beneath the Bone.
The dry desert air stuck to my lungs as I held my head out the car window. The AC had burned out a few hours back, but my dad was determined to keep going. Yeah. I feel like a lot of writers say that they have trouble not knowing when to start and stop a story, but I feel like that's always been a strength of mine. I've never questioned where to start a story. It should always just be like as late as possible, right before a little bit of, I mean, you need like a little bit of status quo before the big thing happens at the start of the story, but just like as late as you can go to the start of the story is where you should start it. We don't need any boring stuff in the beginning. But it also just depends on what kind of story you're writing, so it's a little bit subjective.
And so the next book I wrote was in 2022, and I'm not going to reveal the title because I really like the title, but I'm just going to call it DGS. If you can figure out what that means, good for you. And that one was 68K. I seem to have a 68K like curse. I don't know if you could call it a curse, but a lot of the books I've written in the last couple of years have been like exactly 68K, which is kind of funny. I am an underwriter, so I write shorter books, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because I write romance and mystery, and those are generally shorter genres than other genres. So yeah, okay, so that was another YA mystery, and this one had a serial killer element, and I really feel like I added a lot more of my style and my personality into the story, and I really learned where my strengths lie as a writer. I'm really great at like character development and dialogue and humor and story structure. So yeah, I learned a lot from writing that book. I have since edited it. I have edited it multiple times now. I think it's like on the 4th draft, and I do plan on coming back to it eventually, but like I said, I'm just focusing on Austin Moon right now, which is my adult pen name, and most of my, or all of my YA is going to be under my name, Ryan Winters, in the future, but that's not going to be for like at least a year, so why even talk about it?
The crimson blood dripped down his hand to the tip of the wicked hunting knife, then onto the floor, pooling beside his well-shined shoes. A scream rang out, and the woman said, "Christy," Mom shouted from downstairs, "can you come here?" I groaned, my finger poised on the next page of my book. "Right now?" I shouted, knowing what the answer would be.
And then the next book I wrote was this past fall in 2023. I wrote 100 Miles. That's not the full title. You'll get the full title when my book drops. It's publishing in May, or I'm expecting it to publish in May, so that's what I'm saying. This is my first adult book I've ever written. It's an contemporary romance. It's sort of a road trip story, but it's a cycling tour story. Because if you don't know, I'm really obsessed with cycling and really obsessed with road trip stories. I just really like the idea of traveling. I think it's really beautiful. And so that's what that story is. It's a sort of light enemies to lovers romance story about a group of friends who go on this cycling trip down the west coast of the Pacific Northwest. And yeah, I'd say out of all the stories I've written, it's definitely the most of me. It definitely has the most things I love, the Oregon coast and cycling and cooking and humor, and it's definitely a very me kind of book.
And here is the first line of my next book that is coming out in May, which I'm not going to say the title of, but you'll know the title probably in a next video because it is May right now, so I'll be talking about it incessantly. The line is, "A high-pitched squeal cut through the air as I ran down the train platform, carrying my heavy duffel bag on one shoulder and my backpack on the other." That's what it is. It's got a train in it. You know, it's a me book if it has a train in it, because I love trains.
And then and I didn't say it was 68K as well. And then the last book I just finished for Camp NaNoWriMo in April was my next book, which I'm not going to reveal the title because that's going to be coming out soon. But it's a...
Hello, my camera died, so I'm filming on my phone now, and I'm sorry if the audio sounds different. I'll try to fix it in post, but it probably won't be perfect. Where was I? Okay, now I have to switch to looking at my computer. Oh yeah, I was on the last book, the one that I just finished writing. which title I will not tell you. And that one was 67K. See what I mean about the 68K? Because by the time I edit it, it will probably be a little bit longer, maybe 70K, so maybe it won't be 68K, but that still stands. So yeah, I forgot what I was saying about it. It's an coastal romance about a guy who lives in the big city, and he's a land developer, and he's about to get fired, and so he has to go to this small island in the Cape Cod area and convince them to develop part of the island into a new resort deal. And chaos and romance ensues. He stays at this little inn, this inn that's been there for generations and generations, and him and the innkeeper sort of have a light enemies to lovers sort of vibe, which is kind of my thing. I like enemies to lovers, but I think enemies to lovers can be done really poorly. So yeah, I'm trying to not do it really poorly. Here is the first line of my latest book that I'm also not telling you the title of, but this one should be coming out sometime this summer, hopefully. Sour mouth, check. Headache, check. A heavy pit in my stomach that reminds me that today is Monday, check. Pretty good, if I say so myself, and that's actually unedited, so I haven't edited this book at all, so if you like that line, I'm a genius. And that's what my last book was about, so that was 8 books in 9 years. I think I've definitely improved a lot over the years. I'm definitely more of a plotter now, especially my last 2 books that I've written have been extremely plotted. I've started plotting by chapter, which is new for me. I've never previously done that before. I was kind of hesitant to do that because I didn't want the book to feel too like formulaic or like boxy or something like that, but it's actually done the total opposite for me. It's helped me and my creative freedom a lot, just being able to know exactly what I need to do, and it's helped me to write my books a lot faster. Like I just finished my last book in about 3.5 weeks, 70K or 67K, whatever. And yeah, I'm really proud of that. So yeah, those are the 8 books that I've written in the last 9.5 years, and I plan on really amping that up since I'm writing full-time now. And yeah, I'll do an update maybe next year or something about how many books I've written in 2024. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this interested you at all. Let me know what books you've written down below. What was the first book you ever wrote, and how old were you? Have you done Camp NaNoWriMo, stuff like that. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!